Peter, always good to talk to you. So we're talking about this story. People are getting letters in the mail, mysterious speeding letters. What is this? Is this a scam?
No, it's not. And look, it's one of the things the NRMA fought for was if you're going to introduce a new speed camera at a location, you need to notify the community, and you also need to have a period of sending out warning letters to people who have driven past that location and were speeding, because often these cameras go into locations that people are unfamiliar with. Sometimes they go into locations where the speed limit has changed, and in the case of the trial of 4 point-to-point or average speed locations, for the first time ever they're turning them on for cars. So what the government is doing is exactly what the NRMA told them to do, which is when you introduce a new camera to a location, let the public know, and for a period of time, and normally it's 3 months, issue a warning letter.
As you say, people don't know it's there.
Absolutely, people don't know it's there. So a really good example is the ROZELLE interchange, which is what some of the media have commented on this week. So that's a location in a tunnel. So there's not a warning sign in front of the camera. It's somewhere in the tunnel. You don't know where. And it can be confusing for a lot of drivers. It's a new road. It's a new part of the tunnel. Some part of it is 60, some part is 90. The camera is in the 60 part, not the 90 part, which, opens questions right there. And so that's really important that, we give people an opportunity to understand that there is new enforcement in the area. In some instances, that's a new road. In some cases where we've seen they put a camera in a road where they changed the speed limit, and thousands and thousands of people were getting fined because, locals didn't know they changed the speed limit. And we wanted to put an end to that.
Yeah, and oftentimes you don't know whether or not you're actually speeding if you go through the tunnel. A good example of that is if you suddenly look down and you realise you're 5 k's over, or in the case of the motorbike, if you want to get past someone to save your life and you have to do that, so you've got to go 5 k's over the speed limit. Does it give you that leeway, or is it as soon as it's picked you up and you're speeding there and then you get yourself the fine?
Look, there is some leeway. There has to be, because odometer readings are not accurate, and the cameras to a millimetre of your life aren't accurate either. So there's a disconnect between what your odometer is telling you, your speedometer is telling you, and what the actual camera is picking up. So there will always be some degree of leeway. You should never get fined doing 61 in a 60 zone, for example. The last thing we need is people focused exclusively putting their eyes on the speedometer because they're terrified they're 1k over the limit. That's not safe for anybody. So there is a degree of leeway. I don't think the government will actually ever announce how wide that is, but what we tell our members and the community is stick to the speed limit, and as best as you obviously to the kilometre, and you should be fine.
But if you're in a situation like I mentioned on the bike where you've suddenly got to speed up in order not to get caught in an accident, could you use that as a defence in court, do you think, if it went that far?
It'd have to be pretty specific. So, I mean, what you're talking about is an incident where you're about to have an accident where you had to speed up. I'm not sure how often that would happen, and it would all happen right in front of the lens of a camera. So, I mean, our advice is, if you're at risk, slow down, don't speed up.
Right. And in New South Wales, they've got these speed cameras predominantly used for heavy vehicles like trucks and buses. But this trial that's underway for regional areas is now going to include cars and motorbikes as well? Yeah,
that's right. So the point-to-point cameras or average speed cameras have been rolled out across New South Wales and used for trucks for a number of years. The government is looking to run a trial, or has been running a trial, in 4 locations across regional New South Wales, to apply those cameras to vehicles, to cars and to bikes. They have also been issuing warning letters to people who drove through those locations speeding, but that all changes on the 1st of July. So if you go through that location and you're speeding, you'll be fined, you'll get demerit points and a monetary fine like you normally would. And the way those cameras work is there's a camera at point A, there's a camera at point B. It works out the average speed between the two. And if you cross those 2 locations faster than you should, you'll be issued a fine.
Let me ask you this quickly while I've got you. We talked about this on air the other night, that in Adelaide, in some residential areas, they're looking at putting the speed limits down to 40 kilometres an hour in some areas, and some areas 30 kilometres an hour. And we were talking about whether reducing the speed in residential areas to that speed limit is actually more detrimental, that it's actually going to cause more accidents because you're constantly aware, looking down at your speedometer, worrying about trying to keep within the limits.
And herein lies the challenge, and this is the NRMA's view on this has been consistent from day one. Councils should not be arbitrarily changing speed limits in their local area to deem 40k zones or, as you mentioned, 30k zones even more so. You need a consistent approach when it comes to putting speed limits, whether they go up or down. It needs to be evidence-based. It needs to be driven by data. And what I mean by that is you need to look at the performance of the road, the traffic volumes, because that's really important, because that gives you a sense of whether, speed should be 60 or 70 or 50. Keeping in mind school zones are 40. You need to look at the crash history, and it needs to be done over an extended period of time so that the speed is set at the appropriate level for the quality of that road. And before you start changing speed limits, you should be looking at whether or not there are engineering solutions, things we can do to make the road safer. This arbitrary approach of just randomly dropping speed limits in some locations and not others is not going to deliver road safety outcomes. What it's going to do is create confusion in the community. People, as I said, start having to guess what the speed limit is in the local area. And that's unfortunately the path that we're going down. Councils are just slashing speed limits in some locations. Some roads are 40, some roads are 50. You can't tell the difference between the two. Some roads that should be 50 or 60 have dropped to 40. Some roads are really good to drive on, but the speed limit's just been dropped with no real explanation. So that's not what we want. We want consistency when it comes to speed limits. The decision should be evidence-based, not arbitrary, and that should apply whether you're putting speed limits up or down. And I would consistently say up, because in the case of West Connects, the speed limits, and North Connects, the speed limits went up to 90 kilometres an hour off the back of a year's analysis to decide whether or not they were safe enough to be 90 and not 80. That's the approach we should be taking. They're not doing it here, and it's going to lead to poor outcomes.
And also you've got the lack of consistency as well. If you think a road is a certain limit and then the next day it's changed without any warning, half the time you don't know, like you say, if you're moving from variable speed limits from one suburb to the next, it's hard to keep up with which speed limit you're supposed to keep to on your regular drive to work.
The previous government removed warning signs for mobile speed cameras. They were finding more people in a month than they were in a year.
Right.
And overwhelmingly the feedback we got from the public was we were guessing the speed limit. We didn't know what the speed limit was.
Well, that's it, yeah.
They were putting these things in suburban streets where people were either lived there for years and just thought the speed limit was what it was, or in areas where the speed limits had been adjusted and the cameras were just dropped in without any warning. You don't want drivers guessing the speed limit, and the more we change speed limits, the more the more arbitrary it becomes, where each council just chooses to put whatever speeds they want in their own LGA. With the inconsistency causes confusion. Confusion causes both unsafety, and also you lose support for the enforcement program because it feels like they're just finding you in areas where they can.